Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Mindfully Curious podcast. My name is Steph, and I will be your guide for this grounded journey into curiosity. Today's guest is Brooklyn Willerth. Brooklyn is a coach, a content creator, an artist, an energy worker, and just an overall magical badass who is so strong and follows her intuition towards what feels right and most aligned in each moment, which to me is just like a superhero type of skill that of being able to follow your intuition. And the reason I say that is because I believe that in order to follow your intuition, first you have to cultivate it. You have to get to know it. You have to believe in it. And by believing in it, your intuition, you have to have a strong grounding on yourself. So listening to your intuition to me means listening to yourself because you know who you are. You know what you are here to do. You know how you serve, and you know what that voice of love and compassion that comes from deep inside of you sounds like. And you're able to detach that from the judge that lives in your mind. Some might call it the ego, some call it the judge, some call it the mind, the monkey mind. But it is part of this dual world that we live in. A lot of the times these different polarities are named yin or they're named yang, lightness, dark, male, feminine. It basically is just two different ways of going about life. You can go about by really feeling and sensing, or you can go about through logic and thinking. So, Brooklyn really is a person who has cultivated that skill through self-exploration and through self-devotion. And today we are going to be talking all about that journey into self-discovery, that journey into developing a self-love practice. We will be talking about self-love versus self-care and how they are kind of the same but ultimately different. We will be talking about the importance and the value of self-exploration. And Brooklyn, who is a coach and a host of a women's circle, she will be offering so many resources during this conversation. We talk about practices that we have tried throughout our journeys. We also talk about the most accessible practices for anybody out there who may be ready to dip their toe into this self-love universe. And whether you are a seasoned self-love practitioner or one that again is just starting to dip their toe in the water, there is absolutely something for you in this conversation. And this topic of self-love is going to be one that you will continue to notice popping up during following episodes. And honestly, you probably have noticed it showing up in a lot of my content and work. And if you follow me on Instagram, you probably already know that my birthday is coming up, and in order to celebrate that, I have set an intention for the year. And that intention for the year is the intention to explore love. I heard this guy called Peter Crone. He is kind of like a coach, mentor of some sort. People call him the mind architect. But something he talks about is he basically says that everything you do is and can come from love. And a question he poses often is, you talk about love and you know you want to be love and know love and give love, but have you been loving? And that question always F's me up a little bit because, especially once I've set this intention, because every day with every action that I'm doing, I remind myself, am I being loving? And so far, it's been a really awesome journey exploring this being loving as often as I can. So many weird, crazy things have happened, and it's been a beautiful exploration. And I cannot wait to share more of this with you all through this conversation with Brooklyn and through upcoming conversations, and also have a couple of other projects to announce. The first one is going to be, I will be launching a whole platform on self-love. And you guys should have access, you guys and gals should have access to that in the next few weeks. I believe I may be launching this through Instagram in some way. So I've been playing with the OnlyFans platform. And of course, if you guys watch TV, there's like an OnlyFans documentary out there that I recently watched, and I just thought it was so interesting, and I just kind of love the idea of OnlyFans, so I really am excited to incorporate this into my exploration of self-love. All right, my friends, without further ado, here's our conversation with Miss Kitten Callie, aka Brooklyn Willerth. Much love, everyone. Brooklyn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to connect with you.
I am so excited to be having this conversation with you because we're going to get to talk about one of well, I don't want to say that it's one of my most favorite topics, but I feel like it should be everybody's most favorite topic, which is self-love.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that like you don't notice how big of a deal it is until you recognize all these other parts of your life where you're like, damn, if I just love myself more, then all these other things would be fixed. And you're like, wow, that's wild to think about.
It really has blown my mind when it comes time and time again. And I realize like, yeah, love is the biggest, like, it's like the only hack that works, or like the only shortcut that actually works and is reliable. And it's just like, duh. And also like, how in the fuck?
Well, it's one of those basic needs that like from childhood we're trying to have met. So then we build these patterns on how we operate and these thought processes and ways that we think we need to be that make us either avoid love for whatever reason, or then try to get love in weird ways. And then when we figure out, we're like, oh wow, I can just give it to myself, and then it just solves all these other problems. Then it also like allows other people to love you in different ways. And like it's just this ongoing like ripple effect that happens if you just figure out how to do it for yourself.
Insanity, literally. It is, again, it just blows my mind time and time again. So before we get into how you got to be so well versed in self-love and all these other practices that are super helpful in one's journey of finding her or himself, how did you get to be where you are today?
So a whole lot of backstory, which I can shorten the best way I can. So when I was little, I was always really intuitive. My mom said I was just like super connected with everyone's energies. And then as I grew up, there was a lot of like trauma through both like family life trauma. And then I was bullied really aggressively as a child. And it got to the point where right before I left high school, I tried to commit suicide. And it was like really intense. I went through a lot of emotions, and I decided that I was like, you know what, like I can do this. I can figure it out. And I decided to leave the little town that I lived in moved to another city, and I basically lived on my own, and I was like, I'll just figure it out. And it was so distressing. It was like really challenging. I remember I couldn't figure out how to, I couldn't call to book to have internet brought to my house. Like I was afraid to call people. And so I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't go get groceries. So I was too scared to drive in the car in the big city. Like it was so chaotic for a while. And I was like, well, I'll just have to figure it out. And I ended up finding movement practices through doing hot yoga and through going to the gym, because I had been abused both sexually and by partners in the past. And so I got to the point where I was like, no one will ever be strong enough or more powerful than me in a way that I can't protect myself. And so then I started just going super deep down the gym and activity rabbit hole, because I was like, I'll find something that'll make me feel strong enough that no one else can hurt me. And I went down that for a while. And then I got into sales, and I got into a bunch of different really masculine positions that I was like, oh, I can work on the masculine parts of me and work on personal development. And I started to grow those skills, and I was like, wait, there's a whole bigger level to this that's not just me being aggressive towards everything I do, whether that's trying really hard to figure out working out or working really hard to be in sales. I didn't need to be in those masculine portions. And then I went full 180 into feminine sexuality. I learned, I studied Tantra for a while. I was doing a lot of yoni egg practices and dance and these things that were so feminine. And then I was like, oh, damn, that also isn't the answer to be full one way. And so then I went in this kind of exploration through medicine work and ways to connect with my body, that I was like, I can balance in the middle and still have those masculine parts of me, but then have the feminine softness and tenderness that I need in order to feel really deeply connected to myself and really in that place of self-love.
And your story resonates with me so much, because I too can say that I started my life just kind of seeing the relationship of my parents, and my dad was, kind of I'm Mexican, so very much in the machismo culture, women are kind of stay at home, and they're not second class citizens, but kind of. So I always grew up thinking okay, I gotta be an alpha ass like my dad, sorry dad, I love you. But I always kind of felt like that, and I too just went through life kind of white knuckling it and trying to make it. And I got a bachelor's of public health. I always kept fighting well, I love being creative, but that's not going to pay the bills. And I went to school, got a bachelor's degree in health. I thought about working in a hospital. I hated it. I too got into really toxic and dangerous situations, relationships where I felt okay, I can't keep living like this. So what am I going to do? And again, white knuckling it, try to go to grad school. And then, the stress got so bad. I fell into really terrible addictive patterns at that time. I gained 60 pounds. I just kind of gave up on me. And, this white knuckling it down the road was just not working for me. And that really is when I started looking into personal development, because I was in business school and that was a huge part of the curriculum. And whenever I started getting into that, I was like, oh my God, what the fuck have I been doing with my life? So
yeah. No, that whole toxic masculinity thing is so ingrained in our culture, because we have this societal fear of the feminine, right? Because feminine is this beautiful, flowing, playful, soft aspect of what is half of our society, but we think we have to do it in this masculine culture, and we've had that masculine culture ingrained for decades and decades and decades. And I work with women right now, and the one thing that we notice a lot is that because we've had these patterns, our moms and our grandmas, they lived in a totally different society where they had a third of the rights that we have now, if that. And so now for us to be oh, we just have to rewrite all these ancestral patterns, because it's they had no, even how they taught us just isn't it's completely different from how we're living now. So it's a lot to rewrite for sure.
It's so wild. I saw a weird timeline on the internet the other day that showed when women actually got the right to vote, but it was compared to all of these other events in history. And I was oh my God, that was yesterday. What the hell?
Yeah, it's so wild thing, because we're oh no, women have had rights for so long, and it's not really. In our grandma's time, maybe not. It's not that far behind us. And for women, for both women and men, we carry the trauma that our mother had when she was in her mom's womb, right? Because cellularly she had the tissues that she had to make us as babies. So I was like, we have that trauma that's ingrained in us. If we haven't done that work, and if they didn't do the work, which let's be real, they probably didn't, then it's our responsibility, and we're still holding that energy.
Yeah. And, they didn't do the work because they didn't have the resources. And I feel like we are so lucky today with the wealth of knowledge that we have through the internet. I mean, it helps us tap into all this information. And then it also helps us kind of like distribute our own flavor of knowledge, which is kind of what we're doing today.
Yeah, it's like, this is that. It's like that
Exactly.
beautiful connection, because we are in two totally different places in the world, and yet this can reach anyone who is looking for this type of information.
Yes.
Beautiful.
So, self-love, how did you kind of start dabbling in? Okay, before we get into this meat, I'm gonna give her something because y'all heard her. The lady needs something. I'll be right back.
All good.
I am a real sucker and my dogs really play me, but hey.
I get it completely.
So, self-love, how did you kind of start getting into self-love? Like, I mean, I can definitely say that for me, I started by saying, oh, self-love. Okay, well, I'm super comfortable with taking baths. Like I started adopting hot baths as like a practice. I'm like, anytime I'm feeling just super drained or whatever, like I'll go take a bath. Next thing you know, I'm taking like 2 baths a day. Like I wake up and 1 hour later, I'm in there, like lights off, candles, like bubbles, the whole thing.
That is so funny that you say that, because that's kind of the way that I started too. Like with self-love, I kind of associated self-love being the same as self-care, because I didn't totally understand it, right? So I was like, oh, okay, if I want to love myself more, I'll just do the things that I like. So it was like this process of trying to date myself, and I was like, cool, well, I like soft things, and I like face masks, and I like bubble baths, and I was like, I'll just do a lot of those, and then that will get me to the place of self-love. And I think that was a good place for me to start, because I was able to explore those things and like really start to understand like the things that I needed to do when I was feeling drained. Because I didn't also totally understand the ways that I was getting my energy way, and that I was like losing myself in situations because I was doing it unconsciously. And so definitely started with a whole lot of self-care. And then I kind of went down the sexuality route from that point. Like I did a lot of self-care for a while, and it was just this like practice where I was exploring like with adding movement and doing different workouts, and then figuring out, I was like, oh, I went too far and I was pushing myself too hard. Now I gotta fall back into where I was before. And then I would swap it out, and I started doing more practices that were like self-touch. And so I would do a lot of practices in the mirror where I was like touching my body. And for women, one of the things that I always recommend to do is like to look at your vagina in a mirror, like just super up close. And you're just like, cool, let's just explore this. And so I did a lot of like self-touch practices in ways that I was just like really connecting with my body. Because I was like, if I can't figure it out like mentally, I'm going to start physically and just like get really into my body. And I did that for a while. And then I actually found there's a book about self-love, and it was like, I can't think of the name of it. The author is Kamal. I don't remember his last name.
Oh, love yourself like your life depends on it.
Yes, it is such a good book. And so that one talks a lot about how you say I love you, or love myself out loud in the mirror. And I would do it, and at first it was so like awkward to do, because like you look at yourself and you're like, I love myself, and it's like this awkward, you're like, cool, can anyone hear me, should I get closer, am I too far? Like it's like this weird practice to get started. And I did that for a very long time, and then eventually I was like, cool, this just feels normal. And then it was a familiar thing. And then funny enough, in a medicine journey, I had done mushrooms, and I was with a whole bunch of people. It was my first time doing like a real mushroom ceremony. Like I'd done it for microdoses and done it when I was doing ecstatic dances, but that was the first time like really doing a ceremony. So I had like eye mask on and a blanket, and I was like in it for a few hours. And before the ceremony, the facilitator said, just so you know, like if you go to the bathroom, just make sure to be cognizant that your reflection in the mirror might be different from what you are used to seeing. So just be like quite cautious, right? And I just took that as, don't look at yourself, like it'll be scary. So I went to the bathroom, and I was like, after like 3 or 4 hours like being in the ceremony, and the ceremony was fairly challenging because I had just gotten out of a really like intense breakup. And so I went, and I was in the bathroom, and I remember I was just looking down, and I was like, don't look in the mirror, don't look in the mirror, don't look in the mirror. And I looked up in the mirror, and I was like, oh my God. And for the first time ever, I think I saw myself how other people saw me. And I was like, oh my God, I love you so much. And it was like this time that for the first time ever, I felt it. And it wasn't me trying to force it or me trying to make it happen. And I know there was so much work that led up to it, but it was a moment of like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And then since then, it's felt like things have been a lot easier. Definitely, there's still regression and times where I have to work on it. But now, like every day when I journal, the last thing I write is, "And I love myself." And it's just those practices of reminding, because you kind of need to remind yourself, because we do as humans kind of fall back in the old patterns that we used to have when we're doing things for a while.
Hell yeah. And I totally resonate with that. I've done those mirror practices too. And I remember like going like, I love you. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, this is stupid. And then I'm like, why is it stupid? I'm like, fuck, it's because I don't fucking believe in it. Like I keep saying it and I'm like, no, I don't. No, I don't. I'm like, why am I doing that? Like that is so bad.
And it's like this voice behind you, like it's because we don't believe it, right? Like if you think of any of the thought patterns that we have, they're like this trampled out path in the forest, right? There's one way that we've gone for so long, whether that's like negative thoughts about yourself, or if you're like, you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, my stomach is fat, or why does my face look that, or oh, it has zits. Like you're used to that being the pattern that you say. Then all of a sudden when you say something else, it's like you're just walking in the middle of the forest and you're like, what the hell is that, right? And then it takes a while of you walking that same path, and then every now and again you're like, oh, I'll just go back where I was before, and you're like, that still feels weird. And it takes a while of like rewriting it, but it feels awkward for a long time.
What a beautiful way for you to alchemize that experience, though, of like walking into that bathroom thinking, like, looking at myself in the mirror is going to be scary, and just being like, don't do it. And then having like a complete, I don't know if it's a 180 or a 360, but just like taking it fucking back in such a beautiful way.
And it's funny because I brought that story up to a lot of friends, and they've had similar experiences. They're like, yeah, I didn't want to look in the mirror because they've been on like 6 grams of mushrooms and looked in the mirror and saw their face like a whole nother, and they're like, this is a lot. But then they have that like middle ground dose where they're still fairly into medicine, but look at themselves and they're like, wow, look at you, right? And they're just like staring at themselves for a long time because it's the first time they can see themselves without those like perceptions and projections that we have about how we need to be and what we think we look like.
Yeah, what we think we look like and the perception that we have of what we should look like, that is normally, just kind of unconsciously absorbed by us and brought to us by the beauty of the collective unconscious, where we're like, oh, if you have like one stretch mark, you're trash, and it's like, yo, everybody has them, like calm
Absolutely.
down. It's not a big deal. It's hard, to, like you say, undo the path that you've been walking in your brain of like seeing these commercials on TV and probably hearing, like, I know that I'm like the only woman in my family, except for my grandma's, that hasn't had any type of plastic surgery. And I'm not judging anyone that has had plastic surgery, because believe me, if I would have had the chance, like, I would have taken it. But it really just makes me think like, damn, like surgeries are like a real thing. It's like a huge investment of time, money, energy, and it's also kind of like scary as fuck. And so many people are just wanting to change themselves like so much that they, it's super common to go that far.
I think we're always looking for like a quick fix or an easy out, right? And those type of things usually provide that, right? Because if you want to look a certain way and you aren't that, but there's an easy way to make it happen, it seems like a nice path. And definitely there are benefits, because there's like even times where people have like surgeries where they can't breathe out of their nose, so they have things moved and removed so that they can actually have that, and it ends up having their face changed after, and there's like a benefit to it. Like there's definitely ways where those things make sense, but I think a lot of it comes from like a place of lack, right? We don't want to address whatever that internal issue is of being like, oh, okay, like for me, I used to want a boob job so bad. I was like, I had small boobs, and like I got to the point now where I'm like, I love them, but it took me a long time, because I see this like all these images of women who have like breast implants, and they have these like beautiful chests. And even now there's moments where I'll be like, that would be nice, but I'm like, but this is what I have, and this is great. And it definitely takes conscious awareness around those thought patterns, because they come and they go, and they can come with a vengeance.
Hell yeah, they do. On that note, I want to say that I'm on the other side of the camp. I got huge boobs when I was like 12, and I was like, I didn't even know I had them. But then, I found out thanks to everybody else. Men and women were always like, whoa, you have huge boobs. I'm like, oh, that's fucking great. Like, I don't feel awkward at all. So I've always been like, I've always wanted a boob job to make them smaller. I'm like, make these things go away. Like, I don't want them.
It's so wild, because like all of those like ideas that we have about our bodies, they usually come from childhood, because there's some perception that we had, like it's usually some like stupid kid on the playground like makes a comment about it, and then we just hold this onto our life, and because we don't think back to when those beliefs started, that they often just run our lives unconsciously. Like for me, there was a guy who had made a comment about, I think it was like that girls, that the sound of girls peeing was not sexy. Like it was like I was like 15 and some like stupid guy was like, yeah, when the sound of girls peeing is not sexy. And it was until like 6 months ago that I was like, wait, why am I so weird? Like I live with my fiance and in the bathroom, like at night, I'm like, what if he can hear me pee? And I'm like, why does that matter? And it was like this belief that I hadn't really recognized had been like guiding my life in this weird way since I was like 15. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to believe that because really like that's a ridiculous thought. And it's just some stupid kid's perception that shifted me. So it's, yeah, those little like childhood memories make a big difference in how we act now.
Random little things that we absorb that really can fuck you up in a way, you know?
Oh yeah, that's the majority of the things that we're dealing with now. It's these like little tiny traumas or comments or ways that we were rejected or tried to have our needs met and then they weren't. And we're like, oh well, now that's part of my shadow, and I'm not going to look at that. Now we're just operating as an unconscious person with this big shadow behind us of how we don't want to be, and it just kind of happens from all those like little steps along the way.
Man, and I don't know if you think from your experience that self-love practices and just really trying to continue to find out what you like and how you operate, has that helped you just kind of make it easier on you to let go and like find those things that are kind of weighing you down?
Oh God, yeah. Like there's a process. Like I kind of talk about it as like dating myself in the beginning, right? Because it was like you don't really know because you've been operating unconsciously. So it's this process of like self-exploration and raising your self-awareness to understand, okay, what do I actually do and don't like? And I find that for me at least, I know for a lot of women, the idea of like speaking our mind and speaking about what we actually want is scary. Right. So it's like, oh, I do or don't like this. So it would start out with being like, people would ask me questions and I'd be like, cool, I have to give an answer. So like, where do you want to go for dinner? And I'm like, I don't really care, but I'm going to be like, I want Chinese food, right? Like I had to like give an opinion because that like process of learning to date myself was this like raising a self-awareness, because then I would see those patterns because I'd be like, okay, well then why don't I feel like it's safe for me to express my opinions or express my needs? And then I was like, well, let's dive into that. And it would take a little while of me trying to explore whatever that like core belief was. And then I'd explore myself a little bit deeper and I'm like, oh, look at this thought. And I'm like, well, where did that come from? And then I'm like, I go a little further, I'm like, oh, where did this come from? And it's a continual process, but because then you start to get like more of a roadmap, then all of a sudden you see like a little bit of a better vantage point, and you're like, oh, now I see these other kind of ends of my map right now. And then it gets a little bit further, you're like, oh, now it's a little bit further. And it's just a slow and gradual process. And then you find the parts of yourself because you realize you're like, oh wow, this is really beautiful, it's really amazing. And like you have appreciation for how you show up and who you are that you wouldn't if you didn't have the full picture.
Hell yeah. I love that, how you express that, being curious when something comes up rather than being judgmental or being fearful. I definitely think that's a huge golden nugget. Be curious. Like when you feel fear, just be curious about it, you know? Just
Absolutely.
ask
It's like
why.
it's just the exploration of it, because it's like for the most part we try to push it away, and that's why we have all these periods of resistance. That's why it comes up so aggressively, because we've been hiding from it, right? If we just look at it, it doesn't need to be that we think we can fix it immediately or that we can solve it all like right away. It's just let's look at it. Let's just look at it without judgment. And I know it's a little bit scary, but then eventually it seems like, oh, it's actually just this little thing, and I'll just shine a little bit of light on it. It's not so bad.
Not so bad at all. But you know, that little thing that you could just get curious about, it might be tiny, but then you put it in your bag, you know, and by the time you keep climbing this mountain, and this little thing is gonna keep getting heavier and heavier as you keep going up. So if you're trying to kind of grow yourself up as a person, like optimize your life, letting these little things that we just kind of carry in our backpack, like you don't need no shame to make it up there, you know, like take those out of the bag and leave them on the road.
Yeah, and I think it's like we just hold so much unconsciously, right? We hold all those little things, and then we don't even realize that we're going up the mountain super slow, because then we start to lose things. We're like, wow, I'm getting so fast and I'm getting so high up this mountain so quickly. And it's because we're letting go of all those things that we thought we had to hold.
Absolutely. It really is. Again, love is like the biggest hack. And I don't mean hack in like the negative way. I mean it in like it's like the only shortcut that works.
Absolutely. Like the more that you love yourself, more people can love you, the more that you can show up fully, because you're not like you lose the judgments that you had about yourself, and therefore you lose judgments about others, right? Because everyone's just mirroring back whatever you're afraid of looking at in yourself. And when you start to look at all those things, when you see them in other people, it doesn't come from that like conflict place. It comes from that place of like, wow, I see that in them, and I love that in me, and I love that in them.
I love that point. I love, there's like a Brene Brown quote that basically, I'm going to sum it up because it's really long, but it basically tells us that one only has the ability to love another as you have the ability to love yourself.
Oh yeah, I've heard, like, that's one of my favorite quotes when it comes to self-love, because like we have these relationships that, like, especially with like intimate partners, like we have these relationships that feel really challenging, and it's because we aren't letting love for ourselves allow, like, we aren't letting love in for ourselves, and then by not doing that, then we can't love them, and then we can receive their love, because we just have this blockage that we're putting our own little ceiling on the amount of love we have based on the level with which we love ourselves. It's so like counterintuitive, and sometimes that's the catalyst for change for people, because you're like, wow, you can't actually show up in love for all these people that you think you love so much, because you won't let it in for yourself. It's that like abundance of receiving and giving that you have to be in flow with, or else you're not giving to the point that you think you are. And like for people pleasers, that's such a big thing. People are like, oh, I just love everyone in my life, and I'm like, but you aren't letting any of it in, so you're not really loving them.
It's pretty funny that you bring that up, because I know, again, I grew up in Mexico. So part of like my training as a woman was to like be a super adept caretaker. And I will give it to the women in my family. Like they are amazing caretakers. And I love that they kind of cultivated that in me. But I did find myself as an adult, in a relationship, just kind of being super happy and like in love, and just like pouring all this water into this plant, where it's like, oh, this plant is thriving. But I didn't really notice that like all of the water, was supposed to also be shared with me. And I wasn't doing that. And, very soon I found myself in like a really huge depressive state where I literally just, didn't think I was worth anything. And I feel like I'm not alone. I feel like that happens to a lot of people. We kind of start a relationship with, great intentions, but at some point through it, it kind of gets muddled up. And that's why I think it's so important to really establish a self-love practice, so that you are committed to looking at your self-love tank like on a daily basis, so this doesn't happen.
Absolutely. And like it's that idea that you have to fill up your own cup before you can give to others. And like wherever it is that you're overflowing, like wherever you have excess like energy or love or resources, like that's when you can give it to others. Because I've been in the same place. Like I've been in relationships where I was like, I love you so much and I'm here. And then it would be overwhelming for them because like I'm not receiving it, and I'm just giving them all this love that obviously is coming from a place of wounding in me, that it's mirrored back unconsciously, and they're like, this is intense, this is too much, and I'm like, well, they just can't receive it. I'm like, well, neither could I. Because it's that reflection. Like you have to be able to take care of yourself and make sure that you're taken care of. And like it's that the quote where you go on an airplane and like put your safety mask on first, right? Like you have to take care of you, or else you're just like, you have to show up for your garden before you can ever try to help others with theirs.
So for the people listening right now that are like, all right, like I'm like, okay, I hear ya. So now what do I do? Like, what do you think would be like, through your work with clients and, like your own journey, what do you think would be like a good way for somebody to start?
So I think journaling is like super, super important. There's lots of journal prompts that you can find online, or if there's certain like thought leaders that you like, lots of people post all kinds of journal prompts and you can explore those. For me, what I do now is in the morning, I will just write down like whatever I'm feeling, and I'll just kind of talk about myself. And it's this like short little period that I have to talk about my feelings. And sometimes I'll let myself like pass judgments or things that I wouldn't want to express outwardly, because it's just me really understanding like where my shadow is. And so I'll write everything down just to get like a good idea of what's going on, and then have that practice where I'm just connecting with myself and I'm learning about what's going on and I'm being curious, right? That curiosity is such a big piece of it, because if I write something down, I have that moment to be like, okay, well, why do I think that? Or where did that come from? And start to ask myself questions more about what I'm thinking and why I have those emotions. And those questions are what's really important, and it's things that you can start to ask as you go through your journal, right? As you write things down, you're like, okay, just question it, right? If you're like, I'm feeling really sad today. Okay, where did that come from? Like, when have I felt this before? Like, when did it start? And just kind of asking yourself questions. Then what do I do if I'm in this state previously? So if I feel sad before, like, what do I normally do? And then the other side of things is doing that, like I said, dating yourself. So truly understanding like what it is that you do and don't like, and always providing an opinion. So like a good little practice to do is just for like the next week, right? From today, whenever you listen to this podcast, and a week from now, go through and every single day, every time someone asks you for an opinion, even if it's like the smallest thing, just provide it. And it seems like a weird step, but it's that idea that you're learning to trust your own voice, and that self-esteem and that self-confidence then work in partnership with self-love, because as you give those opinions, then even if you don't really feel like you want to, then you're like, oh, okay, cool, I'm confident in that opinion. And you teach yourself that your voice is important. And when you start to feel like your voice is important, then you want to express it more in other ways, and you'll express it to yourself, because you begin your own like internal monologue feels safer, and you feel like you could trust it. So it's like those processes of like exploring yourself. And then I am such a big fan of saying I love myself in the mirror. And so the way that you do that, if you haven't read the book, is basically stand like 5 inches from yourself in the mirror so you can see really close. Ideally, you look directly into your left eye, because that's your soul eye. And you just stare at yourself and you say, I love myself. I love myself. I love myself. And you say it over and over again until you feel it. And the first couple times you do that practice, it might not happen. It might not happen for the first 6 months that you do it, but you want to do this on a consistent basis, because you're rewriting those patterns. And when you do it, like emotions can come up. You might even get frustrated. You might have those thoughts, like you mentioned before, of being like, what the hell am I doing? And those thoughts come up, and it's not to judge yourself in that practice, but just to be like, okay, this is normal. And like looking at like, okay, look at this funny human experience that I'm in, that I'm on this pattern that I know consciously, but yet I'm still dealing with these like human things. And so to let yourself go through that practice and all those 3 practices is like the best way to get started, and to really even level up if you're at a place of like pretty decent self-love now. Those are ways to just kind of kickstart it.
Yeah, man, journaling is such a powerful practice that it's not just for teenage girls, it's for everyone. And it can be very cathartic. And I would just want to tell people out there, when you're journaling, just try to be honest with yourself. Try not to censor yourself in any way. If you are scared that somebody's going to read your journal, like tear the page out afterwards and like throw it away or burn it, whatever you need to do. But just make sure that you're really working on like not censoring yourself, and just try to be honest with yourself as much as possible. Like, I understand sometimes you might have to bullshit someone. I understand, but try not to bullshit yourself.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And you can catch yourself doing it, because you'll write something and you're like, oh, why did I say it like that? Or like you'll tell a story and you'll tell it from an angle where you're like, I just painted myself in a way better light than I did in the situation, right? And yes, so like being brutally honest with yourself is so important. So thank you for bringing that up.
Hey, I had to, because I am a great bullshitter. And, I'm like, I've bullshitted myself for years into not doing things. And if me saying something could help somebody from saving themselves 3 years, well, fuck yeah.
And that's kind of why we're here, right? We want to get the little insights and perspectives that can make it easier for us in our journey. Because like even this conversation with you and I, it'll help me to reflect on ways that I'm even being dishonest with myself in this moment, because there's definitely ways that I'm not seeing that I'm being dishonest, that I'll figure out as I go.
Yes, and no judgment, like to yourself or anybody else when this is happening. That's really where the magic lies, in not judging yourself.
Oh yeah, it's just like you see things that come up, and it can, like for me, I really like to step back and look at it from this funny like observer thing, where I'm like, wow, like look at that funny emotion that I'm having. I'm like, wow, it's so human, and I'm so in this carbon form. And to look at it from those perspectives makes it feel a little bit easier than being like, wow, I'm just sad. I'm like, wow, look at me having sadness. Like this is so interesting to observe, and like pulling back from that place of judgment is so essential.
So essential for people that identify as female and for people that identify as male. Now, I bet, there might be some people more on the masculine scale that are like, okay, well, I can see how this self-love is like important, but are there any practices that could be considered self-love that may be a little bit less of a scary fit to people who may want to stay in more of a masculine energy?
Yes. So I would say this one is a practice that's not necessarily super far feminine, not necessarily super far masculine, but what I like to do is like just do a conscious touch practice. So just set time for yourself, and it doesn't need to be like a sexual thing. It can just be like, oh, people need moisturizer on their skin, so just like take like a 20-minute time, like if you like taking baths or showers, take a hot bath or a hot shower, and just like connect with your body, like breathe into your body, breathe into every cell, and then just take lotion or take coconut oil and just touch your entire body. And you can do it as this practice where you'll touch yourself either like all over really like gently, and you can try harder in certain spots, or you can just explore yourself physically through touch, kind of like a child, right? Like just feel your body. Like, what does it feel like to tap on your arms? What does it feel like to just like lightly graze the tips of your thighs, and on just touch your entire body? And it's such a simple practice, because you're basically just doing like this physically, like, cool, I'll just like touch my feet. But we don't give ourselves love physically in that way, because we expect it to be from like a practitioner or a partner, and it's not something that we do for ourselves. And sometimes just that practice of getting connected with your body can be really healing, because it's things that we might have never done, right? There's people who are in their like 50s who might have never really sat down and been like, cool, I'm going to massage my calves, right? And it's such a ridiculous thing to think of, but it's true. Like, we don't connect with our bodies in that physical way. So it's a really great practice that seems a little bit less scary, because you're like, cool, I can massage my legs. Like, that makes sense. So just sit with yourself, get connected, really touch your body. And then if you feel comfortable, then a really great practice is to journal about it after and just say what came up for you. If there are thoughts or things that you're like, wow, why did I think that this is a stupid practice? Like, just explore that. Right? If there are certain belief systems where you're like, wow, the entire time I was doing it, I just felt like my legs were fat, then write that down. And there's nothing, like you mentioned before, there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong to the practice. It's just an exploration and having that curiosity of like, well, why do I think my legs are fat? Why did I think that the whole time? And have I always thought that? Where did that belief come from? Did someone tell me that, or did I decide that for myself? And starting to explore those is so, like, it's just such a beautiful and easy practice. It doesn't seem as scary.
That's true. And I think that whole connecting with your body part of self-love is so important, because this body is how we experience the world. And if you don't have a good connection to it, I feel like it's kind of like driving a car with like all of the lights on the dashboard, and you have like not like a flat, but like the little tire that you put on whenever you get a flat
tire.
Yeah, like you're driving on your spare and you got all the lights on, and you can change that, like being aware that, hey, when the light comes up, I can do something about it. I don't have to wait until I'm like driving a hoopty to do something about it. Like, I can just like schedule maintenance, and have somebody help me with this if I don't know where to start.
I had a spiritual healer who we did a session, and I was going through lots of like fear around money and scarcity, and lots of just like fear about my power and not knowing kind of how I show up in the world. And he made a comment about how like we decide to physically incarnate, at least as I believe, right? We decide to incarnate our souls into this physical body. And what happens is when we are so stuck in our heads, right, whether that's through like our thought patterns or just being unconscious, like we're in this like upper part of our heads, or we're not even fully in our bodies. And that's where those places of like fear come from, because we're meant to be embodied and fully embodied. And when we aren't, it's this awkward, like, wow, this feels really unsafe and scary, because you're not in your body, right? Like you want to be driving your car, but if you're driving your car, but you're not paying attention, you're not, like, it's going to feel scary because you're not fully there. And so, yeah, the real like connection and embodiment is so essential.
Such a great point. Such a great point, because our mind has the ability to travel to the past, make shit up in the future, be in the present, but our body, it just lives on this plane. So in that really makes sense.
Oh yeah, like it's in this dimension and we are gone. So it's like, come back, be here physically. And like, I am such a big fan of going into other places, and I love that, but you got to be able to fully embody yourself when you are here and when you are intentionally present, because it's like there's a big difference in how you show up every day if you're not fully in your body.
Absolutely. Voice through journaling. Now, you mentioned movement practices. I have personally attended one of your ecstatic dance events, and I want to call it like an ecstatic dance ceremony, because it wasn't like, I've gone to an ecstatic dance thing called Daybreaker. Are you familiar with them?
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was like a ceremony, and I love the energy that they brought to it. But when I came to your ecstatic dance, it was just like on another level. First of all, you opened up with like a beautiful guided meditation that was so grounding, and it really just set the stage for this to be a different kind of experience. So for those in the audience who might not know what ecstatic dance, would you mind talking to us about it a little bit?
Absolutely. So ecstatic dance is the process of having like a guided kind of musical journey. Sometimes they're done where someone will like speak throughout the process of the music, or sometimes it's just like how my partner and I do it, whereas he'll curate an entire playlist that guides your energy so you're able to have whatever experience that you're called to in that moment. And so some cases that can be people will spend the entire time just like laying on the ground, just like really enjoying the music and letting the vibrations of it kind of heal their body in whatever ways or connect with their bodies in whatever ways they need. Sometimes that'll be crying the entire time and just like gently dancing, but you're just crying. And sometimes there's periods of like screaming and yelling. Sometimes it's just this like beautiful, like blissful experience where you're just really in your body. And the way that it kind of happens is when you first drop in, like we don't really know how to move energy in our bodies. Like as people, it's not something we're taught. We're taught to like push our emotions down and they get stuck in our bodies, and even trauma, all that stuff just stays cellularly in our tissue. And so when we start this process of dancing, you start with this kind of like conscious, awkward dancing for the most part. Most people do, where they're like, this feels weird, and I'm just kind of moving. And then slowly but surely, you lose your conscious mind in that movement practice, and then it starts to become unconscious. And with that feeling of being unconscious and with your body moving and releasing that energy, you get to this place of like where you're just not there physically, there mentally, you're just there physically, and your body is allowed to just do whatever it wants. And you set that container with permission that your body can have whatever experience it needs for whatever your highest healing is. And it's so beautiful because it can be these like experiences where you're just in your own dancing, moving, like however you feel you want to. And we do it in a way that lots of times we think when we dance we have to do it like so we look sexy at the club, right? Like for women it's like, oh, I need my boobs to be out, I need to be like moving my hips and being all sexy. And this process is like the full opposite. You're like, I'm gonna dance however I want, however it feels good. And like sometimes it's definitely not sexy. Like there'll be times where I'm doing things I'm like, this doesn't feel like it looks or feels good. Like it's like, but your body just needs those, and we know, like our bodies know what we need, but we don't always listen to it. And so this process is just allowing yourself to move and dance and to have whatever experience you need with that combination of the vibrations from the music and the vibrations of your body moving. And it is just such a beautiful practice. And I originally found it through like I was in the Fit for Service Mastermind with Aubrey Marcus, and they did an ecstatic dance, and I was like, oh yes, this is so good. And so then my partner, who his musical name is Just Like You Imagined, and so he created all these playlists and was like, if you want, like we can set up this dance. And so I reached out to my group coaching ladies and I was like, hey, so I have kind of a cool thing we're going to try. And we started doing it virtually, which I thought was so wild, but ended up being perfect. And he curated this playlist and this perfect little experience. And like you mentioned, it is like a ceremony. It's this way that you can have this like whole experience that feels like you're on medicine because you're so out of your body and you're so in your body and so out of your head, and it's so like healing and beautiful. So yeah, it's just my favorite. It's one of my favorite practices.
Yeah, so much fun. And it really is like, I mean, I love going to raves and festivals and whatever. And I mean, this is, if you are into those kind of vibes, you probably really vibe with this practice because it really is just what you want to do when you go to any rave or festival, which is just move and feel the music and like just vibe with yourself. You know,
Absolutely.
sure, it's nice to have people around, but you are always your own best company, I would say.
Yeah, and like you're just in your own experience. And yeah, it's definitely fun to have people around you and you have that like connection after. And that's usually why we like to have a little circle of little like love and connection after, so we have that space to be like, cool, let's talk about your experience. But yeah, you get to just be in your own world and just really like be in your body in such a way that you maybe never have or don't let yourself all the time. And it's so delicious.
It really is delicious and fun. So I'm going to kind of change the subject a little bit just because I am curious to ask you about, you are also an artist.
I am.
And that's awesome because I believe that we all have the potential to tap into our inner artist, like our inner creator. With every little thing that we do, every thought that we have, like we really are creating our life. So that's going to be your masterpiece, if nothing else. But I love that you went from being really focused on like making money and, make it in the world. And you found a way to have both, be an artist, a creator, and then also kind of tap your creativity into building a business and having fun on the side. So tell us a little bit about that.
So it's actually funny. Like I've been so far in my masculine for so long, and it's stuff that I'm really good at. Like I was top sales performer out of the entire company. I was the only like woman to ever hit 1,000 sales. Like I was really really excelling in those fields. And then in my own business, like I ran a coaching business, which I still have now. And I would do like all the automations and all these fun like marketing things. And I started then building it for other businesses. So I started working with other companies who are either people who are coaching or have these other businesses where they just need help on their back end. And I would just come in and just make all their stuff like work better. And I love it. And that's so much fun. And then it would have been like 6 months ago where I started exploring with like vinyl, and I started putting different like vinyl stickers onto pieces of glass. And I was like, wow, this is fun, because it was like easy for me to do it. And felt like I needed a ton of skill to do it. But I started playing with art, and then all it like, it was so strange to me because I put so much effort into so many things for so long that I'm used to just like toughing it out. Or you said like white knuckling it, like just making it work. That when I started doing art, it was just this instant flow where things worked. And so for me, like there was a lot of scarcity around money for a little while because I did leave my job and I was just doing my own thing and like really being my own boss. And there wasn't a lot of money that was coming in from like a lot of the other projects that I was doing. And the second I started doing artwork, it was like instant, there's money, there's flow, there's abundance. It was like, okay, this is interesting. And so I had talked to another spiritual healer, and she was like, do you ever think that maybe you should pay attention to where the energy is flowing and not put so much like aggressive masculine energy into trying to make everything else work? And I was like, yeah, you're right. I see that. And so I started exploring the artwork for a while, and it became this thing that was so much fun for me. And it's this nice balance because I do what's called cycle syncing. So with my menstrual cycle, I usually do 2 weeks where I'm in my masculine because that's part of your follicular phase, and then your luteal phase, second half, is a whole lot of things to learn. But that second half, you have more feminine energy. And so what I would do is I built my business now where I spent usually the first 2 weeks like really heavily in my masculine, working with people who like I work with all their marketing, and I make sure that their websites are designed. Like I do all kinds of fun stuff. And then I spend the next 2 weeks like just fully in art mode. So I do a lot of work with resin and paint and vinyl, and I do a lot of pieces on glass. And it's just really this exploration that's more fun for me than anything. And like people will reach out and be like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, I don't know, let's try. And it's so much fun for me to just figure it out because it's creating in a totally different way than I've ever created before. And I love it so much.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited for you, and I'm hyper F for creativity. And I definitely love hearing you say that when you get into that creative mode, it's like just kind of anything can happen. Because I think that's what's so beautiful about having a devoted creative practice. And we talked about practices like having a devoted self-love practice and self-care practice. And I think it's important to have a creative practice as well, because if you have a practice where you're like, okay, whatever you prefer your medium to be, in this case, you like experimenting with vinyl, resin. I love that stuff. So many cool things can be done with it. But really, creativity for me, I feel like it's giving yourself the chance to do whatever and experiment and be okay with those experiments not going how you thought they were going to go. Because it's such a safe space, like you're experimenting with like glitter and glue and paint, and it doesn't matter in the big scheme of things, it's not like you're experimenting in the operation room with somebody's like heart and like liver. So it's so inconsequential, and yet, such a powerful practice for allowing yourself to make decisions without judgment and just allowing yourself to be free in a way.
Oh yeah, that freedom is just so liberating, right? It's that idea that it doesn't really matter what you make, and especially if there's not the expectation around like having to sell it or having it to be something more than just that creative space. So like for me, there was a piece of art that I tried to do for my partner, and I was trying to mess with like marbling paint, and I was so excited. And then I had it sitting in the garage where it's slanted, and all of the paint rolled off the canvas. And I was like, I made you this painting. And I saw it. I was like, I did not make you a painting. I'm so sorry. But it was funny because I was like, there was no expectation around that. So definitely in those practices, if you're exploring creativity as something that you're doing to connect with yourself, like losing the expectation around it needing to be anything is so essential.
It's such a fun way to explore, for sure. For sure. And everybody has the ability to tap into their creative power, just like everybody has the ability and honestly the responsibility to tap into that self-love.
Yeah, because that like the creator part of us, like that feminine part of us, just needs to be there. And when we're really in love with ourselves, we're in love with all spectrums of how we show up, right? There are aspects of us that are definitely really beautifully feminine, and there are parts of us that are beautifully masculine. And it's up to us to figure out where we kind of fit on that spectrum, and then just love wherever you end up finding yourself, and know that it can also change, but recognizing that like with that balance, then you can create from wherever you are. And it's so healing and so wonderful.
Man, it really is. So for your coaching, how does that work for you? Do you have like an ongoing community? Do you take private clients?
I do take private clients. For the private clients, it's more of consulting. I usually do that more on the business side of things, but I do work with some women one-on-one. I primarily work with women when it comes to like the sexuality and like connecting with our bodies, because that's where a lot of my experience come from, because I figured it out for myself, right? Like I figured out, I was just trying to find books and resources and courses and events that connected with me. And so from that, it's like, oh, I did this thing and I know exactly what you're going through. So the majority of how I coach now is through group coaching. I have just the sweetest little community of women that we have these fun little workshops. And it's a place for me to kind of explore and play, because I'll do things like, hey, I'm going to put together an ecstatic dance. So let's all hop on a Zoom call. And so those things are really fun for me, because I find that that's the best way for me to coach, because I love just connecting with their energy in that way right now.
I love that you I love that you create a space for women. I personally, again, like I grew up thinking, you know, like with a masculine, my dad, my grandparents, like the male in my family, like always being like the dominant person. So I always kind of shun away from like connecting with the feminine, because I thought it seemed weak to me. But during COVID, I actually had the honor and pleasure to join a small group of conscious women, and you know, had the whole 2020 to show up bi-weekly for these Zoom chats and like circle, share knowledge, share challenges, and that was such a transformative experience for me. I mean, it really did help me heal a lot of that wounding that I had. And just, it's crazy because it's showing up and just being in love with these people and just really providing them with like all the love that I would provide myself, and just try to like not stand in judgment. Wow, like holy shit, that was so healing, you know? It really, I want to say it changed my life, because it really did. And mainly within myself, like it helped me be more accepting of myself. So anybody listening that might be curious in checking out your community, I highly recommend it, because you don't know until you try.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's funny that you mentioned that, like that changing is like joining a group and having that kind of change your perspective. Because for me, like one of the reasons that I started the group is because I recognized that I still had like weirdness around women, because I was bullied by girls growing up, right? I had all these like really toxic relations with women when I was younger, and I had this perception that like women need to be pinned against each other, right? Like we're always just competitions. And there was a conversation where I had with my group coaching where one of the girls she went to meet her husband's ex-fiance, and she was like, it was so weird because everyone that knew that they were meeting was like, whoa, 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 why are you meeting her? And she's like, I want to meet her. Like, I want to be her friend. I want to connect with her. And it seems so normal in her mind, but there's societal perception around being friends with your husband's ex-partner was like so ridiculous. And it kind of brought this perception where I was like, wow, we really have this societal belief that women need to be like enemies and that we're always out to get each other. And like even when I was in sales, like I would do really well, and then like another girl would succeed and people would be like, whoa, she's coming, she's gonna take over and she's gonna be better than you. And I was like, it's not that. I want her to succeed. But I had a lot of like really toxic feminine beliefs, and it was weird because I didn't like getting along with women and didn't like getting along with men, and then had this weird like in between space. So when I started the group coaching, there was a part of it where I was like, damn, this is going to be difficult for me, because I have to get rid of all my weird perceptions around women and like make this a space where women that are like me feel safe to show up, because they're like, oh, I also had fear around women and now I feel safe to be in this container too. So it was a big learning curve, but it was so healing. So yeah, if there are any listeners that do want to connect, like we're going to open registration again soon, probably in April, and I am so excited to add some new energy because it's such a sweet little community. I love it.
Oh man, yeah, you're so lucky to be able to curate that experience for them, and they're very lucky to be able to enjoy it. Now, brothers that may be listening, there are lots of like brother circles that you can join. Do you ever work with men?
I've done workshops where I had men involved, like a lot
Okay.
of like sexuality, because there's a lot of communication and understanding that helps when you understand women a little bit better and then understand yourself better. And it was really helpful because I've learned a lot through my partner's own journey of sexuality. So I've learned a lot of the masculine side because I didn't really care to figure it out because I was like, it's not for me, right? But usually, like when I'll do different events where I have both men and women involved. Primarily with the private coaching, I'll do just women, but definitely if there's a man who feels like openly connected, I'm definitely willing to try. But primarily when I market, I'm marketing to women.
Yeah, or even, if somebody's listening and they're like, hey, I'm a male, they could at least perhaps reach out and you could point them to some resources.
Absolutely. I have tons of friends who are incredible coaches and who even run different men's circles and things. So I have lots of resources. If anyone has questions or wants to reach out, absolutely. I love checking DMs. I love responding and love connecting.
Y'all heard it here first. Brooklyn, thank you so much for coming here and sharing yourself with us, sharing your medicine. And I'll make sure that I link you on the show notes and any material that we've referenced. I want to be respectful of your time, but if you have any last message or words, anything you want to share with us.
I would say just for any listeners to get really curious about yourself. And I know that we've mentioned that a few times, but with anything that comes up, whether that's through self-love or through your own practices, or through your sexuality, like come to everything that you do with that like fun, almost like sarcastic curiosity where you're like, whatever comes out of it, that's perfect. And that is one of the best pieces of advice that I can give for wherever you are in your journey, because we all have different perceptions and beliefs and stories that create our reality tunnel in a certain way, and to just get curious about where they came from and how we got to where we are right now can be so healing and such a catalyst for massive change. So that is the last thing I will leave you with.
Brooklyn, thank you so much for being you, for doing what you do and doing it like you do it, girl. Or
Thank you.
woman.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited to connect with you. Your energy is incredibly wonderful and you have beautiful conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate Yo, thanks for listening to this awesome episode. If you love the podcast as much as I do, or, if you just want to express how you feel about it, I would love to hear your feedback, connect with you. LinkedIn show notes is our audio link for the show. So if you feel like leaving me a voicemail, you can do it through that link. And of course, you are able to connect with me and our guests through the regular social media portals and the interwebs. You know the deal. All of the stuff is listed on their show notes. I hope you let this be your call to action to get on the self-love train, or to prioritize self-love if you are kind of already incorporating that into your lifestyle, your routine. Thank you so much for being here. Please remember that we do this because we love to, but honestly, these guests show up here for you. So please, if you at all want to connect, please go ahead and do so. Again, please let this be your call to action. And last but not least, I want to thank you for accommodating my dog being super rude and always finding a way to interrupt these conversations. As you guys know, I live with a couple of dogs and they're a huge part of my life, and I really just kind of allow them to do whatever they want, and sometimes they interrupt my conversations. So thanks for bearing with me through that and all other technical issues that have been going on during this podcast recording. I love you, and I can't wait to talk to you. Oh yeah, guess who's that? Calling me to get off the mic. But anyway, I can wait until next week and talk to you soon. Much love, everyone.